Somewhere out there right now, in an attic, in a storage unit, in the back room of a thrift store, or leaning against a wall in someone's garage, there is almost certainly a painting worth more money than most people will earn in their entire lives. And the person who owns it has absolutely no idea. This sounds like a movie pitch, but it is a documented, recurring, historically verified phenomenon. Lost masterpieces turning up in the most mundane places imaginable, being sold for nothing by people who thought they were just getting rid of old junk. And the story we're talking about today is one of the most extraordinary versions of it ever recorded. A painting missing for roughly 2 centuries, passed through unknown hands for generations, and eventually ended up at a garage sale with a $4 price tag on it. The person who bought it liked the frame. They almost didn't look at the painting at all. What they had, sitting in their living room for years without knowing, was a Rembrandt, one of the greatest painters in human history. And the question of how something like that happens, how a $30 million painting ends up at a garage sale, takes you into one of the strangest, darkest, most fascinating corners of the art world that almost nobody talks about. Before we get into the detective story, you need to understand why a lost Rembrandt specifically is such an enormous deal. Rembrandt van Rijn was a Dutch painter who lived from 1606 to 1669, and he is widely considered one of the greatest artists who ever lived. Not in the polite textbook way, where everyone technically agrees but nobody actually feels it, but in the way where if you stand in front of one of his paintings in a museum, your brain does something involuntary. His portraits look like photographs, taken by someone who genuinely understood the person in front of them. His use of light was so precise and so emotionally intelligent that art historians literally named a lighting technique after him that filmmakers and photographers still use today. He was prolific, he was innovative, and he was also, in a very Rembrandt move, spectacularly bad with money. He died essentially bankrupt after years of overspending on art collections, property, and an appetite for luxury he could not sustain. Which means that in the chaos of his financial collapse and in the centuries of sales, inheritances, wars, thefts, and general historical disorder that followed his death, a significant number of his works got scattered, lost, misattributed, mislabeled, sold without anyone realizing what they were selling. The Rembrandt Research Project, an actual group of scholars dedicated entirely to authenticating and locating his work, has spent decades revising the official catalog of his paintings, and the number keeps shifting as new discoveries emerge and old attributions get challenged. There are works out there that nobody has found yet. That is not speculation. That is the professional consensus of the people whose entire career is looking for them. So here is how a Rembrandt ends up at a garage sale. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens across generations of ordinary decisions made by people who had no reason to look too closely at what they owned. A painting gets inherited by someone who doesn't know much about art. They move house, and it goes into storage. It gets passed down again to someone who likes the frame and doesn't think much about what's inside it. It gets donated to a church sale, or included in an estate clearance, or ends up in a box of miscellaneous items at a weekend market, and eventually someone pays $4 for it because it looks interesting and old, and that's enough reason to take it home. What breaks the chain of invisibility is almost always an accident. Someone takes it to an appraiser out of curiosity. A friend happens to be an art historian. The frame breaks during a move, and someone looks more closely at the canvas while repairing it, and notices something that doesn't quite match what it's supposed to be. Authentication is its own entire world, specialists examining brushwork under microscopes, analyzing the chemical composition of paint layers, comparing X-rays of the canvas structure to known works, tracing provenance records through centuries of incomplete documentation. When a major attribution gets confirmed, it sends ripples through the entire art world because it rewrites history in a small but meaningful way. It says this work existed, was lost, and has now been found. It says the official record was wrong, and it raises the uncomfortable question of how many other official records are also wrong, sitting in living rooms and storage units and church basements, waiting for someone to look at them properly. Here is the part of this story that stays with you. The person who bought that painting for $4, who lived with it, who walked past it every day, who maybe straightened it on the wall once or twice without thinking about it, had no idea. Not because they were careless or unsophisticated, but because there was no reason to know. The painting didn't announce itself. History doesn't come with labels. And somewhere in that gap between what something is and what people believe it to be, entire legacies get lost. Rembrandt spent the last years of his life in poverty, while his work was already being celebrated. He died without knowing that 4 centuries later, people would be dedicating their careers entirely to finding everything he made. He died not knowing that one of his paintings would spend 200 years invisible, passed from hand to hand like it was nothing, and then turn up on a folding table on someone's front lawn with a price tag that wouldn't cover a cup of coffee. The painting survived. It always does. It just needed someone to finally look at it properly. So here's what I want you to think about. If you found out tomorrow that something ordinary you owned was actually worth millions, what do you think you would do with it? Keep it? Sell it? Donate it? Because people have answered that question in every possible direction, and none of the answers are as obvious as you'd expect. Let me know in the comments, and tell me if you've ever bought anything at a thrift store or a garage sale that turned out to be more than it looked. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Art, history, mystery, the kind of thing that makes you look at ordinary objects completely differently. Like the video, if this made you want to check everything in your attic, and I'll see you next week.